A humble elderly woman is forced to play the piano in public, but she teaches everyone a powerful lesson. Eleanor Winters pulled her worn cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she shuffled down the hallway of Meadowbrook Senior Living. At 78, her steps were slower now, but her eyes still held a quiet sharpness that belied her frail appearance. The facility wasn't fancy, just affordable enough for her modest savings and social security checks, but it was clean, and the staff treated her with kindness. "Morning, Ms. Winters," called Darnell, the young orderly who always had a smile for her. "We missed you at bingo last night." Eleanor offered a small smile. "Good morning, Darnell. I was just a bit tired is all." The truth was, Eleanor had been avoiding most community activities lately. Since moving here 3 months ago after selling her small house in Rochester, the one she'd shared with her late husband George for over 40 years, she'd kept mostly to herself. The transition had been necessary but painful. Back in her room, Eleanor opened the unassuming case beside her bed and ran her fingers over the yellowed ivory keys of the electric keyboard inside. It was nothing like the baby grand she'd once owned, but it was all she could keep. As a former piano teacher who had once dreamed of concert halls, Eleanor now played only for herself, in private, when she was certain no one could hear. She hadn't touched it in weeks. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Melissa, the activities coordinator, a bubbly woman in her 30s with perpetually cheerful demeanor. "Eleanor, I'm so glad I caught you," Melissa said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes landed on the keyboard. "Oh, I didn't know you played." Eleanor quickly closed the case. "Just a hobby from long ago." "Actually, this is perfect timing. I've been searching everywhere for a solution." Melissa's voice took on an urgent tone. "Our entertainment for the spring fundraiser canceled. It's in 3 days, and we have nothing planned. The director is panicking because we have donors coming." Eleanor felt a cold knot form in her stomach. She knew where this was heading. "I couldn't possibly," she said firmly. "I haven't performed in decades. Not since the incident at Juilliard where her nerves had betrayed her during her final recital." The memory still stung after all these years, the missed notes, the whispers, the scholarship lost. That day had changed everything. "Please, Eleanor, just a few simple pieces," Melissa pleaded. "It would mean so much to everyone. And, honestly, you'd be saving me from getting fired." Eleanor looked at Melissa's desperate expression, then at the photo of George on her nightstand. He had always encouraged her to share her gift, even after she'd given up on her dreams. "I'll think about it," she finally conceded, though every fiber of her being screamed no. After Melissa left, Eleanor sat heavily on her bed. Her hands, now spotted with age and slightly bent from arthritis, trembled at the thought of performing again. The last time she'd played for anyone besides George had been at his funeral 5 years ago, a private goodbye between them. She opened the case again and placed her fingers on the keys without pressing down. The old terror gripped her heart, the fear of judgment, of failure, of not being enough. She had spent decades teaching others to play, nurturing their talents while burying her own. Outside her window, spring was beginning to touch the bare trees with the faintest green. New beginnings, second chances. Eleanor had stopped believing in such things long ago, yet something in her couldn't bear the thought of disappointing Melissa, or the residents who had been nothing but kind to her. Perhaps, she thought, she could play something simple, something that wouldn't reveal how much had been lost to time and fear. Her fingers pressed down gently, and a soft, hesitant melody filled her small room. It was rusty, imperfect, but it was there, the music that had once been her whole world. The Meadowbrook Spring Fundraiser was the facility's premier annual event. It brought together residents, their families, local officials, and, most importantly, potential donors. The community center had been transformed with pastel decorations, floral arrangements, and a small stage where Eleanor's keyboard now sat, looking remarkably inadequate under the spotlights. Eleanor hovered near the refreshment table, her heart hammering in her chest. She had chosen a simple navy dress, one of the few nice outfits she still owned, and had spent an hour wrestling with her silver hair before giving up and securing it in her usual neat bun. "You look lovely," said Ruth, her neighbor from down the hall, a retired librarian who had been one of the few residents Eleanor had warmed to. "I look terrified," Eleanor corrected, clutching her cup of punch so tightly the plastic cracked slightly. "That too," Ruth admitted with a sympathetic smile. "But you'll be wonderful. Melissa told me you were practicing yesterday." Eleanor winced. She had thought her playing had been private, but the walls at Meadowbrook were thin. She had spent the past 2 days painstakingly selecting pieces she might still be able to manage. Debussy's Clair de Lune, a simplified Bach arrangement, and a Chopin nocturne she had once played in her sleep. "I can't do this, Ruth," Eleanor whispered, as the room continued to fill with well-dressed visitors. "Oh, what was I thinking?" Ruth took the punch cup from Eleanor's trembling hand. "You were thinking about helping someone who needed it. That's who you are, Eleanor, whether you admit it or not." Before Eleanor could respond, Melissa approached, relief washing over her face. "Oh, Eleanor, thank goodness. We're almost ready to start. Mr. Harrington, our biggest donor, just arrived." Eleanor followed Melissa's gaze to a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit. James Harrington was apparently a local real estate developer whose mother had once resided at Meadowbrook. According to Melissa, his contributions had funded the memory care wing and much of the facility's recent renovations. "Fine establishment you have here, Ms. Chen," Harrington was saying to the director. "My mother would be pleased to see how it's grown." Director Chen, a normally composed woman, was nodding eagerly. "Boom! We're so grateful for your continued support, Mr. Harrington. We have a special musical program prepared for today." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as Director Chen continued. "One of our newer residents, Eleanor Winters, was once a trained pianist. She's graciously agreed to perform for us." Harrington's eyebrows raised slightly. "Is that so? I'm quite fond of classical music. Trained where, if I may ask?" All eyes turned to Eleanor, who felt her mouth go dry. "Juilliard," she managed to whisper. "Many years ago." An impressed murmur rippled through the small crowd. Director Chen beamed, evidently pleased by this unexpected prestige. "Well then," Harrington said, checking his watch, "I'm looking forward to it." As the guests took their seats and Melissa guided Eleanor toward the stage, panic seized her completely. The keyboard seemed miles away. The short walk an impossible journey. Her arthritic fingers felt stiff and unresponsive, and the memory of her last public failure loomed large in her mind. "I can't," she whispered to Melissa. "Please don't make me do this." Melissa squeezed her arm gently. "Just a few minutes, Eleanor. That's all we need. You can do this." As Director Chen introduced her with embellished praise about her distinguished musical career, Eleanor took her seat at the keyboard. The small crowd of residents, staff, and donors watched expectantly. In the front row, Mr. Harrington sat with an evaluating expression, while beside him, Ruth gave an encouraging nod. Eleanor placed her trembling hands on the keys. The silence stretched, becoming uncomfortable. Someone coughed. She tried to begin the Debussy piece, but her fingers refused to move. The notes she had practiced were suddenly gone from her mind, erased by terror. After what felt like an eternity, she managed to press a single key. The note hung in the air, solitary and uncertain. Then another, and another. But it wasn't Debussy or Bach or Chopin. It was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the first song she taught to every child who came to her for lessons. A few titters erupted from the audience as Eleanor's fingers moved slowly through the simple children's melody. Her cheeks burned with shame, but her hands seemed to have a mind of their own, finding comfort in the familiar nursery tune. From the corner of her eye, she could see Director Chen's frozen smile and Melissa's look of confusion. In the front row, Mr. Harrington's expression was unreadable. Only Ruth seemed genuinely interested, leaning forward slightly as if not to miss a note. As the final notes of Twinkle, Twinkle faded, Eleanor kept her eyes fixed on the keyboard. The silence that followed was deafening. She should stand up now, she thought, apologize for wasting everyone's time and retreat to her room where she could pack her few belongings and find another facility, one where she hadn't humiliated herself in front of everyone. Instead, her fingers remained on the keys, and almost unconsciously, they began to move again. This time, the melody was Mary Had a Little Lamb, another children's favorite. But as she played, something shifted. Without planning it, Eleanor began to add complexity, harmonies, counter-melodies, subtle variations that transformed the simple tune into something richer, more nuanced. She glanced up briefly and caught the eye of a small girl, perhaps 7 or 8, sitting beside what must be her grandparents. The child was watching Eleanor's hands with undisguised fascination. Without breaking the flow of the music, Eleanor smiled at the girl and began to incorporate elements of row, row, row your boat into the melody. The girl's eyes widened in recognition, and she broke into a delighted smile. Something loosened in Eleanor's chest. She segued into London Bridge, but now with a left-hand pattern reminiscent of a Chopin waltz. Her fingers, which had felt so stiff and uncooperative moments before, began to remember their old dexterity. The arthritis was still there, limiting certain movements, but she worked around it, finding new pathways across the keys. A few more children in the audience began to sway with the music, and some of the elderly residents were smiling now, perhaps recognizing the melodies from their own childhood or from days spent with grandchildren. Eleanor's confidence grew with each phrase. She wove Itsy Bitsy Spider into a Bach-like improvisation, then transformed Ba Ba Black Sheep with jazz harmonies she'd picked up from George, who had played saxophone in a small band during their early years together. The music was flowing now, and Eleanor felt herself getting lost in it. She forgot about Mr. Harrington and the donations, forgot about her shame and embarrassment. For the first time in decades, she was simply playing, not performing, not proving anything, just sharing the joy of music as it came to her. She glanced up again and saw that the audience's initial confusion had given way to genuine engagement. Even Director Chen's rigid posture had relaxed somewhat. Several residents were tapping their feet or nodding along with the rhythm. Eleanor segued into You Are My Sunshine, a song she used to play for George during his final days. This one she played straight, allowing the simple beauty of the melody to stand on its own. She felt a lump form in her throat as memories of George washed over her, but her fingers remained steady, carrying her through. When she finally brought the improvisation to a close, some 15 minutes later, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. It started with the children, enthusiastic and uninhibited, then spread to the rest of the audience. It wasn't thunderous or overwhelming, but it was warm and genuine. Eleanor stood shakily, offering a small, uncertain bow. She caught Ruth's eye. Her friend was smiling broadly and applauding with deliberate emphasis. Melissa looked relieved, though perhaps a bit puzzled by the unexpected direction the performance had taken. As Eleanor made her way off the small stage, she felt drained but strangely peaceful. Whatever the consequences of her unconventional performance, she had survived it. She had played again in public, and while it certainly wasn't the Juilliard recital she had once envisioned, she had managed to find her own way through it. She was making her way toward the refreshment table when she felt a hand on her arm. She turned to find herself face to face with James Harrington. "Ms. Winters," he said, his voice measured and formal, "I wonder if I might have a word." Eleanor followed Mr. Harrington to a quiet corner of the community center, bracing herself for criticism. His demeanor was difficult to read, neither obviously pleased nor displeased. "That was an interesting choice of repertoire," he said finally. Eleanor straightened her shoulders slightly. "I apologize if it wasn't what you expected, Mr. Harrington. It's been many years since I performed." To her surprise, a smile cracked his formal facade. "My mother used to play those same songs for me, with many of the same variations. She wasn't classically trained like you, but she had a natural gift for improvisation." The tension in Eleanor's shoulders eased slightly. "But that's not what I wanted to discuss," he continued. "Director Chen mentioned you taught piano for many years?" Eleanor nodded. "For over 4 decades. Mostly children, some adults. The Harrington Community Center downtown needs a music teacher for their after-school program," he said. "The position is part-time, just 2 afternoons a week. The previous instructor retired last month." Eleanor blinked, trying to process his words. "Mr. Harrington, I'm flattered, but I'm 78 years old. Surely you'd prefer someone younger." "What I'd prefer is someone with experience," he replied. "Teacher, someone who understands that music isn't just about technical proficiency, but about connection. What you did up there, taking simple melodies that everyone knows and transforming them, that's exactly the kind of creative approach we need." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, they were interrupted by the young girl Eleanor had noticed during her performance. She approached shyly, half hiding behind her grandmother's skirt. "Oh, excuse me," said the grandmother. "But Lily here wanted to meet you. She's just started piano lessons, and she was very impressed by your playing." The girl, Lily, looked up at Eleanor with unabashed admiration. "How did you make Twinkle, Twinkle sound so different each time? My teacher only shows me one way to play it." Eleanor knelt down, ignoring the protest in her knees, to meet Lily at eye level. "Well, music is like a conversation. There are many ways to say the same thing, depending on how you're feeling or who you're talking to." Lily considered this seriously. "Could you teach me to do that?" "I?" Eleanor glanced up at Mr. Harrington, who was watching the interaction with interest. "I haven't taught in some time, but perhaps—" The grandmother beamed. "That would be wonderful." Lily's current teacher is very strict about proper technique, which is important, of course, but she comes home discouraged more often than not. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. "The community center has a fine piano," he mentioned casually, "and the children in the program come from backgrounds where private lessons aren't always an option." Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Just an hour ago, she had been terrified of touching a keyboard in public, and now she was being offered a teaching position and a potential private student. "Could I think about it?" she asked, rising slowly back to her feet. "Of course," Mr. Harrington replied, handing her a business card. "The position remains open until filled." As Lily and her grandmother moved away, Ruth appeared at Eleanor's side with a cup of punch. "So," Ruth said knowingly, "I take it Mr. Harrington wasn't disappointed by Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Eleanor shook her head, still processing. He offered me a job teaching music at a community center. Ruth didn't seem nearly as surprised as Eleanor felt. Are you going to take it? I don't know, Eleanor admitted. It's been years since I taught regularly. And the transportation. Meadowbrook was on the outskirts of town, and Eleanor had given up driving 2 years ago when her eyesight began to deteriorate. Details, Ruth waved dismissively. The important question is, do you want to teach again? Eleanor thought about Lily's eager face, about the way the music had flowed once she stopped trying to impress everyone. She thought about all the students she'd taught over the decades, some diligent, some reluctant, all of them carrying a piece of her teaching forward in some way. I think I do, she said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. But I'm afraid, Ruth, what if I can't do it anymore? What if today was just a fluke? Ruth squeezed her friend's hand. What if it wasn't? What if this is exactly what you're supposed to be doing at this point in your life? Across the room, Eleanor saw Melissa chatting animatedly with Director Chen, both of them occasionally glancing in her direction. Other residents were looking at her differently now, too, with curiosity and a new kind of respect. For the first time since moving to Meadowbrook, Eleanor felt visible. Not as a feeble old woman who needed assistance, but as someone with something valuable still to offer. Maybe you're right, she conceded. But there's something I need to do first. The following Tuesday afternoon found Eleanor seated at the upright piano in the Harrington Community Center, a converted warehouse in a working-class neighborhood downtown. Mr. Haurinthoins, Artintfoiderdins. Harrington had arranged for a Meadowbrook van to transport her twice a week, and Director Chen had enthusiastically supported the arrangement, clearly pleased by the connection to the Harrington name. Eleanor had spent the weekend practicing on her keyboard, working through simple teaching pieces and exercises, remembering the methods that had worked best with beginners. Her fingers still ached with arthritis, but regular playing was already making a difference. More importantly, the joy she had rediscovered during her improvisation at the fundraiser had remained with her. She straightened the sheet music on the piano as she waited for her first group of students. According to the program coordinator, she would be working with 8 children, ages 7 to 12, from the surrounding neighborhood. Most had little or no previous musical experience. Ms. Winters, the coordinator, a young man named Jason, poked his head into the room. The kids are ready when you are. Eleanor nodded, feeling a familiar flutter of nerves, though nothing like the paralyzing fear she had experienced before the fundraiser performance. This was different. Teaching had always been where she felt most confident. The children filed in, 4 boys and 4 girls, a mix of ethnicities reflecting the diverse neighborhood. Sapruti. They eyed her curiously, no doubt taking in her age and formal attire. Eleanor had dressed carefully in a blouse and skirt, her silver hair neatly pinned, as if she were giving a private lesson in her former home studio. "Good afternoon," she began. "My name is Miss Winters, and I'll be your music teacher." A boy in the back row raised his hand immediately. "Are you, like, 100 years old?" There was a collective gasp from the other children and an apologetic look from Jason, but Eleanor merely smiled. "Not quite," she replied calmly. "I'm 78, old enough to have taught hundreds of students over the years, including some who went on to become professional musicians." She moved to the piano and played a quick, jazzy rendition of "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," similar to her improvisation at the fundraiser. The children's expressions shifted from skepticism to interest. "Who recognizes this song?" she asked when she finished. All hands shot up. Good. Music begins with recognition, with listening. She played a simple C major scale. Today, we're going to learn about the building blocks of music. By the end of our session, each of you will be able to play a simple melody. Eleanor had forgotten how exhausting teaching could be, especially with a group of energetic children. By the end of the hour, her back ached and her voice was hoarse, but she felt more alive than she had in years. Each child had indeed learned to play a simple 5-note melody, and their pride in the accomplishment was evident. As they were gathering their belongings, a woman appeared in the doorway. Eleanor recognized her immediately as Lily's grandmother from the fundraiser. "Miss Winters," the woman said warmly, "I hope you don't mind us dropping by. Lily has been talking about nothing else since Saturday." Lily peered around her grandmother, smiling shyly at Eleanor. "See, not at all," Eleanor replied. "It's lovely to see you both again. We were wondering if you had given any thought to private lessons," the grandmother asked. "Lily's current teacher, well, they don't seem to be a good fit." Eleanor hesitated. Taking on private students again was a bigger commitment than the community center classes. But looking at Lily's hopeful expression, she found herself nodding. "Perhaps we could start with one lesson and see how it goes," she suggested. "Maybe Friday afternoons, after my session here." As arrangements were being made, Eleanor noticed one of her group students lingering by the piano. It was a girl named Zoe, who had shown a natural aptitude during the lesson. "Ms. Winters?" Zoe asked hesitantly. "Could I stay a little longer and practice? We don't have a piano at home, and—" "Of course," Eleanor said without hesitation. "Let me show you a few more things before I leave." By the time Eleanor returned to Meadowbrook that evening, she was thoroughly exhausted, but filled with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. Ruth was waiting for her in the dining hall, eager to hear about her first day. "It was wonderful," Eleanor admitted, picking at her dinner. "Challenging, but wonderful. The children are so eager to learn, Ruth. Even the ones who were clearly sent there just to have something to do after school." "So you'll continue?" Ruth asked, though the answer was evident in Eleanor's animated expression. "Yes, and I've agreed to take on 2 private students as well." She explained about Lily and Zoe, the latter of whom couldn't afford lessons, but whom Eleanor had offered to teach for free after the community center sessions. Ruth smiled knowingly. "Look at you, building a whole new life at 78. Eleanor laughed softly. "Hardly. Just reconnecting with an old one, perhaps." Later, back in her room, Eleanor opened her keyboard case and played softly, mindful of her neighbors. She wasn't practicing now, just playing for the sheer pleasure of it, something she hadn't done in too many years. On her nightstand, George's photo seemed to smile approvingly at her. "You were right," she whispered to it. "The music never really left me. I just stopped listening for it." 3 months later, the Meadowbrook Community Center was filled once again, but this time for a very different kind of performance. Signs posted on the walls announced "Student Piano Recital." Teacher, Eleanor Winters, in colorful lettering. Eleanor stood near the makeshift stage, greeting parents and adjusting sheet music. Her student roster had grown to 15, 8 from the Community Center program and 7 private students, including Lily and Zoe, who had shown such promise that Eleanor had continued teaching her for free. "Nervous?" asked Ruth, who had appointed herself unofficial assistant for the recital, helping to arrange chairs and distribute programs. "Not for myself," Eleanor replied, "but some of the children are terrified. It reminds me of how I felt at the fundraiser." The memory of that day, only 3 months ago but feeling like a lifetime, made Eleanor smile now. Her initial failure had opened a door she never expected, leading her back to teaching and to music on her own terms. The community had embraced her new role enthusiastically. Several Meadowbrook residents had arranged to attend the recital, proud to support their friend who had become something of a local celebrity among them. Director Chen had even used Eleanor's story in the facility's newsletter, highlighting how Meadowbrook supported residents in pursuing their passions at any age. "Ms. Winters," Lily approached, wearing a flowered dress and an anxious expression. I think I forgot the middle part of my piece. Eleanor knelt beside her. Remember what we practiced? If you forget a part, what do? Improvise, Lily answered dutifully. Make up something that sounds right until I remember the next part I know. Exactly. Music isn't about perfection. It's about communication. Play from your heart, and the audience will hear what matters most. The recital began with the youngest students playing simple pieces, some with Eleanor's assistance. Parents recorded on smartphones and applauded enthusiastically, even when mistakes were made. Eleanor had deliberately created a supportive atmosphere, emphasizing progress over perfection. Midway through the program, Mr. Harrington slipped into the back row. Eleanor nodded to him in acknowledgement, no longer intimidated by his presence. Over the past months, their professional relationship had evolved into a mutual respect. He had even attended one of her community center classes, observing quietly from the corner. When Lily's turn came, she played her piece, a simplified Mozart sonatina, with focused concentration. In the middle section, she hesitated, clearly having forgotten the notes. But instead of stopping, she improvised a simple bridge passage, just as Eleanor had taught her, then smoothly rejoined the piece for the final section. The proud smile she flashed at Eleanor afterward was worth more than any perfect performance. Zoe was the final student to perform. Eleanor had arranged it this way deliberately, knowing that Zoe's natural talent would provide a strong finish to the program. The girl had progressed remarkably in 3 months, her dedication evident in every practice session. Zoe approached the piano with uncharacteristic confidence. The piece she had chosen, with Eleanor's guidance, was Debussy's Clair de Lune, the very piece Eleanor had intended to play at the fundraiser before panic overtook her. It was ambitious for a beginner, but Eleanor had arranged a simplified version that preserved the essence of the piece while making it accessible. As Zoe began to play, Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. The girl's interpretation was far from technically perfect, but she captured the dreamy, ethereal quality of the music in a way that many more accomplished pianists missed. She played with feeling, with communication, the very qualities Eleanor had emphasized in their lessons. When the final note faded, there was a moment of hushed appreciation before the applause began. Zoe's mother, who worked 2 jobs and rarely made it to lessons, wiped tears from her eyes. As the recital concluded and refreshments were served, Eleanor found herself surrounded by parents offering thanks and inquiring about lesson availability. She directed most of them to a sign-up sheet, explaining that her teaching schedule was limited by her own energy and transportation constraints. "You've created something remarkable here," Mr. Harrington commented, approaching with a cup of punch. "The board is extremely pleased with the program's success. The children did all the hard work," Eleanor deflected modestly. "True, but they needed the right guide." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "We've received a grant to expand the music program, enough to purchase 3 more pianos and hire another part-time teacher." Eleanor raised her eyebrows in surprise. "I was hoping you might help us select someone," he continued. "Perhaps mentor them in your methods. The children respond to your approach." "My approach," Eleanor echoed. "Teaching them that music is about expression, not just execution. That making mistakes is part of the process." He gestured toward Lily, who was excitedly showing her grandmother the certificate of participation Eleanor had created for each student. That young lady forgot half her piece today. But she didn't give up. That's a life lesson more valuable than perfect Mozart. Eleanor felt a rush of pride. Not for herself, but for her students. "I'd be happy to help find another teacher," she agreed. "I might even have someone in mind." Later, as the community center emptied and Ruth helped Eleanor gather her belongings, Zoe approached with her mother. Ms. Winters, Zoe's mother began hesitantly, I wanted to thank you personally. Zoe's school teacher called me last week and said her grades have improved dramatically since she started music lessons. She says Zoe is more focused, more confident. Music teaches discipline and patience, Eleanor explained, and the satisfaction of working toward a goal. Whatever it is, it's working. Zoe's mother squeezed her daughter's shoulder proudly. We can't afford to pay you what these lessons are worth, but Eleanor held up a hand. Seeing Zoe's progress is payment enough. And now that the center has additional funding, we might be able to arrange a scholarship. After they left, Ruth gave Eleanor a knowing look. You were never going to charge them, were you? Even without the scholarship, Eleanor smiled. Some things are worth more than money, Ruth. As they waited for the Meadowbrook van outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the community center parking lot. Eleanor felt a pleasant tiredness, the kind that comes from meaningful work rather than the empty fatigue that had plagued her in recent years. You know, Ruth said thoughtfully, when you first came to Meadowbrook, I worried about you. You seemed so withdrawn, like you were just waiting for time to pass. Eleanor nodded, acknowledging the truth in her friend's observation. I was existing, not living. I thought that chapter of my life was over. And now, Eleanor watched as the last of her students left with their families, instrument cases and certificates in hand, futures still unwritten. She thought of the fundraiser that had seemed like such a humiliation, but had instead become a turning point. She thought of George, who had always believed in second acts, and third and fourth ones too. Now, Eleanor said with quiet certainty, I'm writing a new chapter, and teaching my students to write their own. The Meadowbrook van appeared around the corner, and Eleanor gathered her sheet music, already planning next week's lessons in her mind. The fear that had once defined her relationship with music had transformed into something else, a respectful partnership, an ongoing conversation. She had come full circle, from the young woman devastated by a failed recital to an elder sharing the joy of imperfection and resilience through music. The lesson she had taught her students and herself was that life, like music, wasn't about achieving flawless performance, but about continuing to play, even after the inevitable wrong notes. And in that continuing, that persistence lay all the beauty that mattered.